Now, you know governments are in desperate trouble and desperate for tax revenue when they start raiding the dead. I shouldn't laugh, but that's exactly what Australia's worst state government, the Allan government in Victoria, is doing. A death tax increase on probate, with some estates being slugged an extra, wait for it, 600% to have a will signed off on. Now, the government claims this is to fund the operations of the Supreme Court, but that's very odd because the last state budget in Victoria slashed court funding. This is clearly a tax grab by stealth. And of course, Victorians are paying more in property and company taxes than anywhere else in the nation. For more on this, we're joined on this Friday night by Victoria's Shadow Finance Minister, Jess Wilson. Jess, welcome.
Thanks.
Am I right? Tax by stealth?
Absolutely. This is a tax by stealth. And what we're seeing here is an Allan Labor government absolutely desperate for any money they can find to pay for their record debt. Now, this is going to be a tax that hits Victorians at their most vulnerable time, at a time that they're dealing with the loss of a loved one. And what these fees require is to be paid up front. And what we're seeing is a 645% increase on probate fees for estates between 250 and 500,000.
Which is pretty common.
Exactly right. That's not uncommon at all. In fact, so many of the probates will fall into that category. But what we are also seeing is the doubling of fees for estates of $2 million to $3 million, or for estates over $7 million, tens of thousands of dollars now going towards probate. And what the government has said is, at a time that families are trying to pay for funeral expenses, they've acknowledged the fact that it might be difficult to pay these fees up front before probate is granted and these people can get access to the estate. But they said, well, you know, put it on a credit card, take out a loan.
Well, that's hardly what you want to do when you're trying to arrange a funeral. So what's their justification for this? Is there one?
Well, they're saying this is going to help pay for the cost of the courts. But as you said...
Didn't they slash the court?
They did. In the recent budget, they've slashed the court budget by $20 million. And what we know is that previously, the cost recovery on probate fees was actually 300% already. What these new fees will be was 1,000% cost recovery. So this isn't paying for just the probate system. This is going into the court system more broadly as the government cuts and slashes the court's budget.
How do we compare with other states? I mean, because clearly one of the things that I think is happening in Victoria, you know, anecdotally, but there'll be some statistics eventually, that these state taxes on people, and we can start with things like land tax, sales tax, company tax, are driving people out. We're going to have a net negative on population growth. People are going to flee. How do we compare probate-wise? I've never checked it. I mean, worst thing in the world. Who goes and checks what probate is?
Well, and it's not something people think about because previously the fees have been what you would think is quite reasonable.
A couple of $100.
A couple of $100, and particularly for those smaller estates, you know, quite insignificant in the scheme of things. But now that's not going to be the case, and we're not going to be competitive with other states. The state government has introduced new tiers. The $7 million category, for example, of a state is a new tier. That's over $16,000 that people will be paying to have probate granted before they can get access to the estate. And as we know, these are people who are dealing with the loss of a family member, the loss of a friend, and now they're going to be grappling with these extraordinary charges. This is simply a death tax by stealth.
If I go back to the death of my father, which was traumatic, and you don't think about probate, but you have expenses like funeral services, memorial services, all of the things that go with a relative passing. Last thing you need is a whack on top. How much does this say about how broke Victoria is?
Oh, I think this speaks volumes as to how broke the government is and how desperate they are for cash at any opportunity. And we've seen in recent weeks the dumping of reports, annual reports from across government agencies that show the debt right across the government sector. Whether that's the public insurer, whether that's Victoria Police, debt is mounting in every single agency and Victorians are paying the price for that.
Well, they did one of those classic take the trash out on a Friday afternoon exercises. And how many reports did they dump at once?
They dumped over 180, but what's more concerning, Steve, is that they actually held back over 130 reports. And what those reports were all the health agencies, all the hospitals. So we've got a health system in crisis in Victoria. Yep. And of the 76 health services, not one annual report was produced on the day it was required to be produced.
What do you suspect that would tell us if we had them?
Well, I don't think it's happened by coincidence. I think the Health Minister knows exactly what's in those reports. We know that there's cash flow issues in Victorian hospitals. They simply don't have enough cash to pay their invoices. And we've seen the Treasurer have to stump up more money for Victorian hospitals just to keep those operating expenses going.
So you can see that Treasurer Palace is sitting around with senior public servants going, righto, find me money no matter where it falls. I don't care if it's down the back of a couch, find me money. Talk to me about this report in The Age in regard to water companies and the amount of money they're paying in what's called a COVID tax.
That's right. So the Treasurer now has gone after our water corporations, and our water corporations have already gone to the Treasurer and said, we actually need to take on more debt to be able to keep our services going. And he's gone and said, I want capital repatriations, I want dividends, and now efficiency payments as part of paying down what they call their COVID debt plan. And so at a time when we've seen these agencies go to the Treasurer and say, we're taking on more debt, he's going to those water corporations and saying, no, you need to give me more money so I can manage Victoria's finances.
Well, in the end, that's going to end up on a water bill, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly right. Every time Victorians turn on the tap now, they have to think about, well, am I going to be paying more because Treasurer Tim Pallas simply can't manage the books?
So talk about mortgage arrears as well. I mean, obviously, we've spoken about real estate. The area that they've really stuck their hand in Victorian taxpayers' pockets is land and real estate taxes. Are we doing worse than the rest of the country and people falling behind in their mortgage?
We are, and we've seen reports this week that show that arrears in Victoria and in Melbourne are leading the nation, and that's certainly something we don't want to be leading the nation in. And the fact that Victorian property prices, Melbourne property prices, are falling. And not only do Victorians pay the most taxes overall, they pay the highest property taxes in the nation. And we've seen the last year's budget, the land tax increase, the reduction of the threshold from 300,000 to 50,000. So there's going to be thousands, hundreds of thousands of people now paying land tax for the first time. And what that is resulting in investors fleeing Victoria, saying, I simply can't afford to invest in this state anymore. And if we don't grow the economy, we're never going to be able to pay down our debt.
So also talk to me, I'm hearing about cuts in the regions. I mean, we went through that whole fiasco with the Commonwealth Games, bidding for it, getting it, dumping it, costing us hundreds of millions of dollars. Wasn't the excuse for holding the Games in the regions in the first place that we were going to build infrastructure in the regions?
That's exactly right. And this is the biggest lie that the Allan Labor government has actually delivered to Victorians, is to say, we're going to take on the Commonwealth Games. You know, they're going to cost $2 to $3 billion, but it's all going to be for infrastructure in regional Victoria. It's going to be for tourism in regional Victoria. But then, of course, we saw the cancellation of the Games because they blew out to $6 to $7 billion. And now those in regional Victoria are simply not getting access to that infrastructure.
But Andrews and Allan told us that regardless of the fact the Games were gone, the money was still there. It's $1 billion and we're going to continue to spend it. Do we believe that?
No, we know this is a city-centric government. Whether it comes to their new planning changes, trying to make sure that we're building these apartment towers in central Melbourne and established suburbs, forcing more people into Melbourne, spending money there rather than infrastructure in our growth areas or in the regions. Look at the road budget, a 16% slashing of our road budget in regional Victoria. Talk to anyone who goes into the regions, they talk all the time about the shocking potholes, the dangerous roads. We see that budget slashed all the time.
Yeah, I'm driving to Adelaide next week. I'm not looking forward to the roads.
Well, be safe on the roads.
Jess Wilson, thank you very much. Thanks for your time tonight.